One of the most important truths about hurtful people is this: they don't control you unless you hand them emotional authority. Hurt only becomes power when it enters your mind and starts shaping how you feel, think, and respond. The real danger isn't what someone says to you. The real danger is how much mental and emotional space you allow their words to occupy. If someone can ruin your mood, dominate your thoughts, or make you question your worth, they've gained influence beyond what they deserve. Protection begins the moment you decide that your emotional state is not up for negotiation. Not everyone earns access to your inner world, and especially not those who treat you with disrespect, manipulation, or cruelty. This is where emotional boundaries come in. Emotional boundaries are not walls that block people out, they are filters that decide what gets in. They allow you to hear criticism without absorbing insult, to acknowledge negativity without internalizing it, and to remain steady even when someone is trying to provoke you. It's the discipline of choosing not to react impulsively, but instead responding with intention and clarity. Hurtful people often thrive on reaction. They feed on emotional chaos, defensiveness, or insecurity. When they see that they can get a rise out of you, they feel powerful. But when you remain calm, when you refuse to give them the emotional response they're seeking, you quietly take that power back. Your composure becomes your shield. Your silence, when appropriate, becomes your strength. This doesn't mean suppressing emotions or pretending pain doesn't exist. It means acknowledging your feelings without allowing them to control your behavior. You can feel hurt without becoming hostile. You can feel disappointed without becoming reactive. You can feel anger without allowing it to dictate your decisions. Emotional maturity is not the absence of emotion, it's mastery over it. A powerful shift happens when you realize that someone else's hurtful behavior says far more about their internal state than it does about your value. People who attack, belittle, or manipulate others are often projecting their own insecurity, resentment, or unresolved pain. When you internalize their words, you unintentionally carry a burden that was never meant to be yours. Instead, learn to mentally separate their behavior from your identity. Ask yourself, is this criticism constructive, or is it simply someone expressing their own dysfunction? Is this comment meant to help me grow, or is it meant to provoke, control, or demean? Not every voice deserves equal weight in your mind. One of the most liberating skills you can develop is the ability to pause before reacting. That pause creates distance between stimulus and response, and in that space, you regain control. You choose whether to engage, to disengage, to clarify, or to walk away entirely. You stop living on emotional autopilot and start operating from psychological strength. This is not weakness. This is self-respect in action. It also requires releasing the urge to prove yourself to people who have already decided not to understand you. Hurtful people often provoke reactions because they want validation, attention, or control. When you stop trying to defend your worth to them, you cut off their leverage. You don't need to convince someone of your value if they're committed to seeing you through a distorted lens. Your worth is not determined by someone else's emotional maturity or lack of it. There is also a deeper philosophical element here. When you allow others to control your emotional state, you surrender your agency. You become reactive rather than intentional. But when you take responsibility for your emotional responses, you reclaim sovereignty over your inner life. You become the author of your reactions, not the victim of someone else's behavior. This doesn't make you indifferent or cold. It makes you grounded. It allows you to choose peace over chaos, clarity over impulse, and dignity over drama. Another essential part of emotional protection is learning to let go of rumination. Hurtful interactions can linger in the mind long after they're over. We replay conversations, we imagine better responses, we relive the sting. But every time you replay the moment, you reopen the wound. You give the person continued access to your mental space. Even when they were no longer present, letting go isn't about excusing behavior, it's about refusing to let someone rent space in your mind without permission. You acknowledge what happened, extract the lesson, and move forward without carrying resentment as emotional baggage. This kind of mental discipline takes practice. You will not master it overnight. There will be moments where emotions surge, where reactions feel automatic, where hurt feels personal. But every time you choose calm over chaos, Every time you choose reflection over reaction, you strengthen your psychological resilience. And resilience is a form of protection. You also begin to recognize that protecting your peace sometimes means not engaging at all. Not every comment requires a reply. Not every insult deserves a defense. Not every conflict deserves your energy. Emotional strength is often quiet. It shows up as restraint, discretion, and the wisdom to conserve your emotional resources for people and situations that actually matter. As you develop stronger emotional boundaries, something subtle but powerful happens. Hurtful people start losing interest. When they no longer get the reaction they want, when they realize they can't manipulate your mood or self-image, they often move on in search of easier targets. Calm people are difficult to control. Self-assured people are difficult to intimidate. And over time, your sense of self becomes more stable, less reactive, and more anchored in your own values rather than external validation. The goal is not to become numb. The goal is to become untouchable in the ways that matter most. To feel deeply, but not be ruled by what you feel. To listen, but not absorb what poisons you. To care, but not at the cost of your dignity. Because when you master emotional boundaries, you send a clear message, both to yourself and to others. My peace is not up for negotiation. My worth is not determined by cruelty. My mind is not a playground for hurtful people. And once you internalize that truth, you don't just protect yourself from hurt, you rise above it. Once you've learned to protect your emotional space, the next layer of self-protection becomes clear. You must also protect your time, your energy, and your dignity through firm behavioral boundaries. Emotional control keeps you steady internally. Boundaries ensure you are not repeatedly placed in situations that test that stability. Hurtful people often rely on one assumption, that you will tolerate more than you should. They test limits not because they respect you, but because they are trying to find how far they can go without consequences. When boundaries are unclear or inconsistent, mistreatment becomes normalized. Silence gets mistaken for permission. Patience gets mistaken for weakness. Kindness gets mistaken for compliance. A boundary is not about controlling other people. It's about controlling what you allow access to in your life. This means being honest with yourself about what behavior you accept and what behavior you will no longer tolerate. If someone consistently disrespects you, manipulates you, or drains your emotional energy, the solution is not to keep explaining how you feel. The solution is to change how much access they have to you. Many people hesitate to set boundaries because they fear conflict, rejection, or being labeled as difficult. But avoiding boundaries often creates a deeper problem: resentment, burnout, and self-betrayal. Every time you tolerate behavior that violates your values, you quietly teach others that your comfort is optional. Boundaries are a form of self-respect. They communicate, without hostility or drama, that your peace is not available for exploitation. Setting a boundary does not require aggression. It requires clarity. It can be calm, firm, and direct. It might sound like, "That tone is not acceptable," or "If this continues, I won't participate," or "I'm not comfortable with that." The power of a boundary lies not in how loud it is, but in how consistently it is enforced. Consistency is the real test. People will often respect boundaries not because they agree with them, but because they recognize you are serious about maintaining them. When boundaries are repeatedly stated but never enforced, they lose credibility. When boundaries are enforced calmly and consistently, they reshape how others interact with you. And when someone refuses to respect your boundaries, the response is not to argue, it's to create distance. Distance is sometimes the healthiest form of discipline. There is a philosophical truth behind this. You teach people how to treat you by what you allow to continue in your life. You don't need to convince someone to respect you. You need to observe whether they choose to and act accordingly. Boundaries also require you to release the need for universal approval. Hurtful people often push back against limits because boundaries disrupt their sense of control. When you stop prioritizing their comfort over your peace, you may be labeled as cold, selfish, or distant. But being misunderstood is often the price of self-respect. You are not responsible for managing someone else's disappointment when it comes at the cost of your well-being. Another important element of boundaries is learning to say no without guilt. Many people overextend themselves emotionally, socially, or professionally because they fear disappointing others. But constantly saying yes to things that drain you eventually leads to exhaustion and resentment. A clear no is often more respectful than a resentful yes. Your time is limited, your energy is finite. Every commitment you make should align with your values, not just your fear of conflict. Boundaries also help filter who truly belongs in your life. People who respect you will adapt. People who only value access to you will resist. In this way, boundaries reveal character. They show you who values you as a person and who only values what they can extract from you. It's important to understand that boundaries are not punishments. They are protective structures. They allow relationships to exist in healthier, more honest ways. They prevent resentment from building. They preserve mutual respect. And sometimes boundaries